question where you're like, as we're listening, maybe Jose hasn't spoken a lot, so you might want to direct the question to him.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, to pull people in.
So just
direct
let them
them.
know all the breaks, so they can get their mind right.
Right.
This question is for Dr. Lynch.
This question is for Dr. Lynch.
Oh, no.
Having to be twice as good, exactly.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. And then we'll just keep on going. So the next topic we want to discuss is when and where you enter. How your identity informs your choice of spaces and experiences. We want you all to think about this along with another concept that we often have talked about within the African American community, the fight or flight. Now, we won't get into the history of it, we're just going to talk about how it applies in this
Too big
conversation.
of a program.
Yeah, that's another
History.
program altogether. And so in this particular space, we want to talk about, do you embrace and lead with, or do you downplay your identity at work, school, or social interactions? So really, we just want to sort of get a sense for whether or not you ever felt the need to hide your identity. And if so, does it change your personality in some way? Let's talk about it. And I can just see examples if they don't, if they're seeing.
And then I'm sure Zenobia does make it, should be perfect for this question.
Yeah,
I think me too,
absolutely.
but Zenobia would really good.
Absolutely.
Then the question is,
So we're gonna pick that.
So in particular, on the fight or flight, where does it manifest itself? How do you select where to live? Where to work? Do you intend to remain the only one, or do you plan to maneuver that space? Or to assimilate? Or do you intend to be a part of the collective based on identity? Ongoing other experiences. How, this is a different question, obviously. How do you care for yourself in moments when you feel essentially self-care? How do you maintain, how do you refill yourself after you might have been the only one or being targeted?
Dr. Lynch, you in particular could answer that last question, and then I have another follow-up for you, because just from your perspective, in terms of all that you've learned and studied, what are some ways that we can really reach out to others, connect, assist them in their self-care, as well as leave space for our own whenever we find ourselves in difficult situations?
Alana, can you
So,
turn down my
we're gonna
audio
let you,
on the
as we all
laptop?
know, but we're also in here, we will be collecting census data. I'm hoping that everyone is aware of that and really are going to be diligent in participating. But Dr. Lynch, this is a question for you. What is the impact that the census has on how we are viewed in society in all of these different other categories, right? Is it helpful? Is it harmful? How does it impact resources? You know, what have you seen and what can you tell us about it?
Love it. So is that a wireless?
Yeah, this is for the recording for the streaming.
Oh.
So I'm trying to get it so it's not just my camera mic picking up.
Okay,
It's
got
something a
it.
little closer to you all.
Okay.
So should we block this seat off? Probably should make sure no one sits there. Make sure they don't sit in
I guess so,
her.
yeah.
Yeah,
the
because
mic.
I can hear that
Right.
with the
Right,
curtain, all of that
yeah.
towards the back.
So
Okay.
we'll put something
Take that
there.
down, make it some more
Do not
safe.
sit. Yeah.
We can just drink my coat over it.
Oh, or that.
Yeah, and then that way. Okay, well, great. Well, we've come to the part of our discussion. Thank you to all of you all who've already felt the need to participate and share, but now we do want to hear from you all as a part of our audience. Are there any concepts that we didn't cover here, any experiences that you had that you'd like to share with us as your BSU community? Now is the time. Really what the CEO Action Network reminds us of is that it's important to provide space to have these honest conversations. Only through honesty can we gain trust. Only through trust can we gain understanding. So if you all would be kind enough to participate further, letting us know some things that we've talked about that really hit home with you, by all means, we've got a microphone available. Get the microphone going around. You'll mark the time at 12:45. Well, depending on how much
Oh,
conversation.
it's 11:06. Okay.
Moving right along.
Right.
Doing all right.
Doing all right.
12:05,
You know,
12:15, whatever the case may be.
I want to circle it.
We can do that. I don't think
It
it's gonna
seems so,
still away, yeah.
so like,
I think the only thing we want to make sure of is that people can be seen. How do we do this? Bring them in a little.
yeah, that's what I meant. Bring them in.
Hey Kendrick,
Ooh. Yes.
going down the east one, what time do you think the
reception gonna start? About 12:30?
No,
No, the reception's supposed to start at 1.
but I think the catering said they're gonna set up at 12:15.
Yeah, we
Okay.
doing that now.
Oh,
This
okay.
one start at 1?
Oh, okay, yes.
Okay.
1 or whenever we get out of here, so maybe a little earlier. So, thank you.
Oh,
Oh,
nice.
thank you.
We'll still be in the room just in case.
Okay, perfect. So do I
she
just
wants-
press this for the full screen? Or how do I?
So we can change from back there.
Okay.
I ain't even sure if that's how you do it on here.
Okay,
But the arrows back and forth.
perfect, okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, that's not.
It's not in there?
And so I'm gonna, just wanna,
I'm gonna go put these in there really quickly.
okay.
Just,
Oh, in the room?
just have them laying out.
In the room? Okay.
But yeah, so I think that HR will be here. 'Cause Tony, is Tony over there? Is he their president, vice president?
He is.
Good to know. That's refreshing. That's so refreshing.
You know what, you
I'm
are,
gonna schedule a meeting with him
you
soon.
are a fool,
I didn't know that.
but you're aware of that, right?
He probably can assist us with some of the
This
community
is,
announcements.
this is a new
He
information.
can assist us with some of the community announcements.
Oh, no, absolutely,
His teammate people's gonna be here today.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, something to think about,
It could be.
cause the struggle is real.
He needs to be part of the work.
Yes. We're gonna sign him up unbeknownst to him during that reception.
Yeah, yeah, you met it.
This is 2D. Well, not
Yeah, 2D, that's the same thing. Yeah, 2D, yeah. That's it. Can you, see if you can see, are you,
I'm sorry, what you say?
see if you can pull up the Bowie State, on YouTube.
Okay.
It's okay, yeah, no problem. They're fine.
Go to Bowie State's YouTube.
Yes.
And see if I can see that.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna put the flyer up. That way, we're not looking at her on her phone. That way, our audience knows.
Or I can just move on over.
No, you're fine. You're
Okay.
fine. I'm on the screen because I want, I want something y'all would test practice and stuff,
Okay,
and I'll get the room audio up. So
okay, perfect.
Trying to get things going. Yeah, go to Bowie State. You see Bowie State University.
I see people making clickbait videos while I left Bowie State University.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Girl, don't be, right, don't be putting your foolishness with Bowie on the internet.
That's it. Look for live man. Click on that.
Or maybe it's my accent, I don't know. It's not moving as quickly. Hello, I'm good.
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for coming and being on time, actually early. I appreciate that. Nice
Oh
to
wow,
see
yeah,
you.
you're right, Billy. Yeah,
Here, you
you're
can
right.
put your
I mean,
bags
Bennett,
down right
sorry.
here somewhere in the front row and just relax. I think actually I'm gonna have you seated
Yeah,
next to
that's it.
Mr. Peters right here.
All right, so I'm gonna pull
for the
mine.
most part, we all have.
That's
our
weird,
own
I can
mics
hear
to
it.
use, so you
Is
can
it
be
off?
in the
Did you
mics
turn
are
it
all
off?
hot, which is great.
That's 'cause she's down there. Her mic's on.
Mindful of that as we are moving
Okay.
around, we gotta sort of hold them.
So,
they
oh,
are
all
wired
right, can you go through each mic real
and
quick? Just wanna make sure I hear
basically,
everybody
we have to
equally.
look at the topics we're gonna be covering. So I just wanna stress this is an open conversation, okay? So there will be very few times that you'll hear, oh, wait, this question is for you. You'll
So who
mostly
designated
be jump.
that?
Yes.
Okay, hands on, we want y'all to jump.
Check, check.
Mhm.
Hey, how are you? Sure. I'm apprehensive to put this in your book bag. I mean, in your personal.
Check, check,
Just to make sure I don't forget it. I have a lot.
Did you say you're apprehensive to do so?
So I
Check,
just wanna make
check.
sure I don't forget,
Yes.
'cause I will
Your
track you
keys,
down.
your keys.
Oh, okay, so my keys.
Yeah, we good.
Your keys are in there already, so.
All right.
Like, I just have a lot of stuff, yeah.
You couldn't possibly, because once you
I'm
realize
telling
you don't
you,
have
it
your
took,
keys,
it
it'll
took a
all.
miracle for me to get here this morning, I won't say that. But I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. Okay? I'm dedicated.
You're here.
Oh, 11 years, follow 8. I'm just telling you. I made it this morning. I was not.
We're streaming.
Is there an extra price?
Streaming.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Is there extra price?
Oh, that's a nice little token.
Are we sure?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just the one.
It's like, this is how I think. It does.
Usually mine have like a pin.
Enjoy. You're welcome.
Michelle, be present April 21st at your
Yes.
inaugural.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will.
Maybe we should order pins. That'd be nice.
You good to
Oh, that
go.
would be nice.
Those are nice.
We have to meet about that.
We do. February 19th. You have a table this week, right?
On Wednesday, yeah.
Yeah, Wednesday. Okay. Okay, let me
We have a table this week.
Let me exactly. Let me text this.
Okay.
This Zenobia. Let's see. Oh look, I make sure the seal wasn't going to be a concern. See that? See that?
I do see that.
Mhm.
You could give me a high five. I don't have coronavirus.
No, I just wiped my sweat, so I didn't want to be.
okay.
You know. No. My conscience.
I've been making sure to just, wash your hands.
Every
you know,
time, yeah.
Wash your
In
hands.
real life.
It's really the flu we got. We like in this area.
That's true.
we have
That's
Yeah.
true. That's very
the flu.
true.
Like Sheba. You have service in there? You have service, obviously.
I do.
Yeah. I'm on the Wi-Fi, so.
Ah.
Yeah.
Another
Don't
question
forget,
for
you guys are streaming live, so
So that,
it is up.
ballroom
Oh, it's
C
up?
is ready to
Oh, we're like
go.
right now?
Right.
Perfect.
Oh,
Thank
Shasha.
you. Okay.
Well, no, you're fine. You got the screen, but anything you see in this room is on the stream.
Oh, okay.
All the mics are on, so all the, right.
So ballroom,
I'm gonna come over here.
Right, I'm gonna move. Unless you wanna turn the mics off, because it's hooked up to the system there. I don't need the lavalier.
And the question is, at any point, people can just.
Yeah,
they already going.
but they're all on, so I don't know how many have switches on that.
We're just gonna step on over.
Yeah, probably better.
I was asking about the room, you don't have any room inside. Okay. Do you want to put the co-rack maybe in the bathroom and make it down there, or put the co-rack outside the door?
What's that?
Just walk right down by the door. Outside the door.
Okay. Let me move.
But you know how some people will come with their coat, because it's standard, everybody's standard.
Yeah.
But then we throw it, well, should we put the coat rack just in the napkins, that way it's still secure? Little bit secure. How do
Alright,
we-
so this is what's gonna happen here.
There it is. So how would you throw this in?
So you've already heard
Face. They come in, they're serving you one or wrap.
down front.
So well, we can just put it direct, so,
Yeah, that's my show.
You're welcome to.
you're gonna announce it in here?
Well, your shot's gonna be
Because
just
there's, I
like,
mean, there's
once
no
you start
lady
to
there.
put,
Oh,
Yeah,
good
captions.
point. Yeah.
and we got 15 minutes before it starts. So, yeah, I would get, let me see the camera.
Okay.
See you guys try to
Say
show.
coat check.
Oh,
Coat rack.
yeah. So you need to get,
Let me check,
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that might be.
You comfortable with that?
Yeah, that works.
Everybody, as long as it's over coat.
let me see.
Exactly. That's what I was like.
Yeah, so you go. Hold on, don't start. Okay, good. Okay, so get a tripod, get a base.
Are you sure you're doing this?
Size up right now. Yeah, so basically, that way you can just set the camera down and then you'll pretty much be good. And then you'll have to move around a couple times, but at least you get an arm. So I just try.
are you gonna use like, it's gonna be, I could probably do.
You're not on the stream. Now, I'm adding.
There's a deal. Should I keep one?
Whatever it's supposed to be. But just don't stop recording, you know, sync it and everything. So when you start recording, yeah. Right. Right.
And so just.
Oh, I know what you're saying, that's just the counting.
Uh,
See Leslie always turns back in.
I wouldn't keep it right now. Bring everything like by the. So I put it in the camera bag. and bring that over here. You don't need a jacket on the side.
We have ordered.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
I'm not taking nothing.
All right, so go over.
Okay, thanks.
It's gonna be.
You got your phone on you, right?
Yep.
All right, okay. You need to get the church finger, it's fine.
Right.
So let us know.
I can do that. Right, so we're the.
So, wait a minute, I also have one thing to request. Actually, that's 12:50, because we have USM.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's no
Sorry.
problem. Yeah, we should be transitioning that out of the room into the reception.
Thank you.
So we just wanted to express to everyone again, thank you. We actually talked about.
And Jose, come on down, and let's do. You're a student, there's no students, I mean, there's no university, come on down.
That's right. We're gonna be joined hopefully by 2 students.
One more.
Maybe on the outside, or we'll see.
Yes, she's not going to vote.
So the purpose of this exercise is for us to have a transparent conversation. So you should feel free to jump in, we'll put out the topics like we talked about, like we sent out to you. And so hopefully you've had a chance to think about maybe where you want to be able to throw yourself in the ring. By all means do, as we're raising the questions and the topics. We're going to start with just a brief introduction where we will, of course, introduce what we're doing here. That's all of the companies that are involved and with the From there, we're going to introduce you all by actually letting you introduce yourselves. So your names are going to be up on the panel. I'm going to arrange you all those so that we're sort of mixed in. So
today's program.
And I am Adonna Bannister Green, and the mic is off. Now it's on. Is it on? It's not on.
Here we go.
Well, this one is. And I'm Adonna Bannister Green, and thank you all so much for joining us today. We really hope that you'll take a lot away from this very courageous conversation that we're getting ready to have.
All right. And so today's program is entitled The Only One in the Room. So we want to make sure everybody, as we're moving closer to becoming a more inclusive campus, this conversation is very important for us. Okay.
Absolutely. So just a few facts, because while this is a great idea, we want to be very transparent and let you know that this is also a part of a commitment that we have made at Bowie State University to be a part of the CEO Action Network. I've got a couple of facts about that up here that I will read aloud to you, but I would be remiss if not starting with the most important one, that we're a part of this community now of other large businesses that are moving in a direction of really being intentionally inclusive.
Intentional.
Because as usual of the work of our president, Dr. Edmond Tebrow. So please let's give her a round of applause for that. This is really important work that we're doing, and I think what's most important about this particular part of it is that it provides us with a level of resources and accountability that we know are very important to our president and that we also know that we would not be able to have on our own. So let's talk a little bit about the CEO Action Network. It is the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion specifically, which is one of the largest CEO-driven business commitments to advance diversity and inclusion within the workplace. This commitment is driven by a realization that addressing diversity and inclusion is not a competitive issue, but a societal issue. Recognizing that change starts at the executive level. So more than 900 CEOs of the world's leading companies and business organizations are leveraging their individual and collective voices to advance diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Now, we're doing that in a couple of different ways. The CEO Action Network right now has 4 material goals that it is set, and what you're about to participate in today really goes directly to that first goal, where we will continue to make our workplaces trusting places to have complex and sometimes difficult conversations about diversity and inclusion. You're also going to see us impart a lot of these goals in the work that our office, the Office of Equity Compliance, and Kedrick's office, the Office of Multicultural Programs and Services, will be hosting throughout the course of the year and throughout the life of the university. That will include implementing and expanding unconscious bias education. Also, amongst the companies within the CEO Action Network, we will share the best and unsuccessful practices, because it's all a part of our ability to learn from one another. And we will create and share strategic inclusion and diversity plans with our board of directors. So, what is the Day of Understanding that you keep hearing about? Why are we actually doing this particular program today? Well, it's actually something that was created by the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion to help address potential bias in the workplace and help foster a culture of inclusion and understanding. I should let you know this is the second annual event. The first was in December of 2018. They then asked that we all sign on as of last November to participate this February 2020. As opposed to being one day, it's now an entire month. So organizations can choose whenever they want to have these conversations. So, over 200 CEO Action signatory organizations, including Bowie State, are taking part in the Day of Understanding by hosting one or more tough conversations at their respective organizations anytime during or around the month of February. And the purpose is to engage in conversations that educate people and support inclusive workplace cultures. So this is what we believe as a part of the CEO Action Network, that through regular, direct, and honest dialogue, employees begin to trust their leadership and the culture of the organization grows. So without further ado, we're going to start that courageous conversation here at Bowie State University.
All right, so there's no program without an icebreaker, okay? So hopefully this is a safe space for everybody. So raise your hand if you've ever been the young man in the yellow shirt who felt like the outsider, who wasn't included. Just raise your hand. All right, awesome. All right, so let's also be more transparent and intentional, as Ms. Attorney Green said earlier. How many people have been the people in the back corner who've made somebody else feel like they weren't included? Okay? All right, so this conversation will guide us throughout our presentation today. Just be mindful that we all are a part of this. You know, we can be inside the circle or outside the circle. All right?
We're going to go next to having our panel to introduce themselves, and we're going to start here to our far right.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. My name is Steve Stevens II. I am the coordinator for fraternity and sorority life and community service engagements here at the university. And I was asked to be on the panel. I am a third-generation preacher's son, and so when my family left Tulsa, Oklahoma, we lived in a small town, Kansas, and small town, Ohio. And I may have been one of 5 African Americans in my class, and at one time I was the only African American male. So that's why I'm on the panel.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jose Romero. I'm a senior education major here at Bowie State University, and I'm from the prestigious Prince George's County. And growing up in Prince George's County in a Latino household gave me some great memories, but also gave me memories where not only did I feel alone or stand out, but made me question society as a whole.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Ayanna Lynch. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Psychology, and I'm honored to have been invited to be a part of this panel. Diversity and inclusion is something that's very close to my heart, and I also teach, one of my favorite classes to teach is cross-cultural psychology, so I see everything through a cultural lens. I also, I always tell people I'm not from this area. I'm from California, which is a very diverse state in many ways, but there have been lots of opportunities or experiences in my own life where I've definitely been the only in the room, whether that's in educational spaces, professional spaces, and I think this is a really important dialogue to have at an HBCU, and I'm glad that we're being leaders in this area. Thank you.
Mary Wise. I'm Interim Vice President for Information Technology here at Bowie State University. Coming from the Philippines, I'm from a Filipino-Chinese background. Came to the United States in 1983, and married to a Jewish guy. So our family is very diverse. The background of both families is diverse. So using the wealth of having an open mind and respect, as part of our, life and growing our, son to be respectful of the universe.
Hello, my name is Zenobia Fenrick. I'm a junior here at Bowie State University, English major with a concentration in language and literature. I was born and raised here in Bowie, grew up in PG County. I'm also the president of the Gay Straight Alliance here at Bowie State. I also help out with RISAs, the Latino student organization. And yeah, I'm here today to talk about diversity and being the only one at the table or in the room.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cometta Hairston. I am Special Assistant to the President for Strategic Initiatives, and I also am a faculty member in the College of Education. I was asked to come today because I actually volunteered to come today. I am from the South, Martinsville, Virginia, so I have my Southern accent, but also a PK, but most importantly, the lightest of 3 siblings. My mom's very fair-skinned. On my mom's side of the family, oftentimes I think some of her siblings may have passed. I've never passed, but out of 3 siblings, I am the lightest one, and throughout my entire childhood, my brother probably got into about 20 to 30 fights a week, protecting me from both black kids and white kids, so that's why I'm in the room.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thanks for being brave today. So let's start with a defining moment. Okay, share your first time you noticed you were different than others in a space. Describe that experience or feeling. A defining moment. Who would like to be first? I know it's hard to be first, but.
I guess I'll go first. So growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was I guess you could call it a caste system, and especially in the 80s. So a lot of my friends were either maybe Latino or Mexican and black, or Native American and black. So the level of attention that you normally got from your colleagues was normally kind of based on your skin color and your hair complexion, or your skin complexion and your hair texture. And so being that I was of a darker hue and thicker hair, I kind of ranked at the bottom of the ranking, if you will. And so just, trying to engage and, talking to, young lady, hey, you want to go roller skating? And I mean, you're cute, but you're cute for a dark-skinned person. And so that's kind of like where I kind of realized, okay, it must be something different about me because I'm not treated the same way as my friends are. So.
The first time I noticed when I was different in the room or different than others in the room in a space is when I first arrived at my old middle school, Thomas Johnson Middle School in Prince George's County. In the 7th and 8th grade, I was part of the baseball team, and I was the only Latino or Hispanic person on the baseball team. And when I say Hispanic, I mean my family's from El Salvador, and the other players were all from near the area, and it seemed like the other players connected well with each other more easily than with me, especially, and it was harder for me to connect with them, especially because everyone kept assuming I was Mexican or celebrated a Mexican holiday. This made me feel pretty upset and alone for 2 years, as even after the first time I told them I'm not Mexican, it's like they forgot, or it's like that's the first ethnicity they look to when they think of Hispanic or Latino. I also played soccer, and I had no similar experiences, even with people from completely different cultures on the team. Maybe the kids on the baseball team were just different than most, but at the time, I sometimes believed that it was me being different simply because of who I am.
Sure, I'll keep it moving. I remember, I don't know if it was so much that I remember being the only one in the room, but I often ask my students when they recall being aware of their cultural identity, so their race or their gender. And the defining moment for me was in the 3rd grade. I was in a combined 3rd and 4th grade class. I went to a magnet school, so there are lots of people from different areas. And I remember being on the playground, and this young boy who was in my class, his name was Tony Hong, shout out to Tony Hong, for making this visible to me. But he told me with a lot of hostility to go back to Africa. And what you have to know is I was raised in a family that was very pro-black, and had a lot of ethnic awareness around that. Black was beautiful in my household, so that wasn't a slur to me. I just didn't understand why he was so insistent that I went back to Africa. And I realized there was such vitriol in what he was saying, and I didn't know where it came from. Ironically, I did not actually realize until the 4th grade, or maybe the 5th grade, looking back, that I was the only African American in that class. And I say that to say that, and I'm sure this will come up later, that it's important that the spaces that we're in are celebratory of who we are or can handle situations. Now, this was on the playground. I don't ever remember it playing out in the classroom, but I wasn't aware that I was the only in that space, and that's because of the way that the teachers interacted in the school and the values that they had for diversity. But what the environment does and then what people do can be very different, and you have to be prepared for both of those spaces.
My experience was when I was 4 years old, we were in the hospital. My little brother was getting born, and my aunt, who was pure Chinese, basically said, "So, baby brother is born. You're not number 1 anymore. Every baby brother will now get everything." And she was my most loved aunt. And for me, now that I look back, it's like 4 years old, and you're telling a 4-year-old she's nothing now because of an event. And so, but I went to my mom, and she explained it, and she said, Mom and Dad will take care of you, just don't worry about it. But, the tradition and the Chinese side of the family was strong. So there were times when, it was a struggle. And then going to a Chinese school and being maybe the only, Filipino Chinese in the room where everybody spoke Chinese, and I had to struggle to learn Chinese. So that was, it sort of made me open at an early age to the differences that exist outside of my small world.
For me, the first time that I ever realized that I was different was perhaps in middle school. So I grew up in a very, very, very Christian household. I was not allowed to listen to hip hop or rap music. My mom raised me on gospel music and Disney music. So by the time people were talking about like the music and new dances, I had no clue what was going on. So that automatically like ostracized me. Additionally, I was always like a teacher's pet, and I was really academically inclined and focused. So I was bullied by my peers for being like too smart, And then there's also like the concept of not being black enough. And that is something that I've always heard from people like, oh, well, you don't sound black. You're not, you know, black. You're more white. I'm blacker than you. So that was something that I've always grown up with as well. And then getting older and coming to terms with like my queerness and my queer identity, that definitely ostracized me from like family members. So now my family members who are from Guyana, they had to sort of like censor themselves when they would talk about the LGBTQIA community because they didn't want to offend me and things like that. So that's really when I learned that, you know, I was different or I was like the only one in the room per se.
I would say the first time I realized I was the only one in the room, we went to high school in the 8th grade. So it was my first day of school. So I spent that summer on my mom and dad's deck, oiling myself down, trying to get darker. I'm like, I'm gonna be dark when I get in. I'm gonna be darker, I'm gonna be darker. Because I always had to hear about how light I was, you know, even from the kids in the neighborhood. And I remember getting on the bus, and now mind you, I had a red afro. Okay, I had a red afro. I was little Angela Davis at the time, because I'm also, my dad was NAACP, PK, very strong in that sense. So I knew all about Angela, I knew all about all the, you know, history of my roots. And I get on the bus, and it's all black kids, and they just start laughing at me. And I'm like, why are they laughing at me? I know I'm dark enough. You know, I really had an identity issue with my skin color. So that was the first fight my brother actually got in. He was like, you know, leave my sister alone, taking up for me. I'm like, no, I'm good. Because when I was in elementary school, when other kids were bullying the kids, I was taking care of the bullies. I'm like the person that took care of the bullies. So I stood up for myself, but it really made me feel like, you know, no matter how dark you try to get, people will always try to, you know, they will identify you. And so I was accepting that identity, and it really, really stuck with me to the point where I wouldn't even call myself Cometta. I was calling myself Kim. So finally, you know, after years, maybe 2 or 3 years, I realized, you know, I'm gonna be comfortable in my skin and be who I am. But that's the day I remember, getting on the bus, getting into a fight first day of school, you know, because I'm jumping in the fight with my brother too, why not? And you're supposed to, but that's the first time I realized I was really the only one in the room.
Okay, so thank you everyone for sharing. So after this defining moment, did you think about how you might make others feel singled out? So after your 4th grade experience, and after your experience in terms of your young lady said you're cute for a dark skin, did you think about how you also make somebody else feel singled out?
I think for me it was that in reverse. I really went out of my way to welcome people and make sure that nobody was a stranger around me. And just like as Cometta said, growing up in a preacher's household, everybody was family. And you know, my grandfather said, you know, Steve, if you welcome one, you have to welcome all, because it has to be fairness and parity across the board. So then I was kind of like the champion for those who were bullied. So if somebody was being bullied, then I was the person that would say, hey, we're not doing that, because I was conscious and I remember what it felt like to be singled out.
To be felt like, okay, something to keep in mind. Okay, others?
I have to agree with Mr. Stevens. I never really wanted to make someone feel like how I felt or feel singled out. I always try my best to make relationships and friendships out of every situation, whether it is me or whether I'm something. I'd say, hey, let's include.
You had to, you know, learn how they also thought about you, and also defend what, you know, you think is right. Being a Catholic school, of course, we could always also ask the nuns for help to say, this is what's happening to us, and, you know, they were understanding.
I'm gonna say something cringy because I actively tried to exclude people who I felt like would hurt me. And I think that came from past experiences of me being bullied. So when I got to high school, there were people, like popular people, who would take an interest in me, and I would actively try to distance myself from them or say rude things to them, or you know, just tell them straight up, like, I'm not gonna be friends with you. But it wasn't until that I started breaking out of my shell a little bit where I was fine with being inclusive to like people who were very popular in school, people who were not a part of the LGBTQIA community, people who were religious. So it took me a while, and I do have to admit that I was a part of that group that did try to exclude people, but I feel like it's definitely based on past experiences and hurt. It's sort of like a defense mechanism in a way.
Anybody else want to answer that one? Okay, so this question is for Dr. Lynch, because now we've heard. Hello? Okay. This question is for Dr. Lynch, because now we've heard everyone say that the way that their otherness shaped them was to ostensibly make them really include everyone else. But by show of hands, including my own, we've seen others who've stated, yeah, there have been times where I've made other people feel exclusive. I think we often think about that in a way that is, mean or harmful, but I find it to be a part of human nature to some degree. And if you could just speak to us a little bit on that, what is the value, I guess, that some people may feel in being exclusive? When that shows up in our society, what really is sort of the basis of that?
Well, what I appreciate about hearing everybody's experiences, it does really showcase that everyone, human behavior is dynamic. That might have been beneficial at some point, and at the point where you feel like you can let people in, you did that, and that's what worked for you. So there is, again, no right or wrong way. And as humans, even those who are we're all talking about being on the receiving end of these experiences, but even those who intentionally point out or ostracize, sometimes, often you've heard the phrase hurt people hurt people. I'm not saying it's a definitive underlying experience for everybody, but sometimes people treat others the way they've been treated. Sometimes there's a lack of understanding. That's why this day of understanding is important. Sometimes it's just a lack of awareness or appreciation of somebody else's perspective. I think back to my experience with Tony Hong, who I didn't mention, was I realized later, and again, a lot of this came retroactively, right? Looking back, he was a first-generation Korean, from a Korean family, and I definitely take into consideration that people engage with others the way it's been modeled for them, right? So it's not always that the people that treat us the way that they do, that they're intentional, that they're aware. Sometimes they're just repeating what's happened or what they've seen other people do. And until we have conversations like this, until there's awareness and enlightenment and an opportunity to hear other people's perspectives, those paradigms don't really shift. And so it could serve them. There could be some value, like the you can't sit with us, we're exclusive, and it gives us some kind of ownership of whatever it is we're trying to keep people from. But sometimes it could just be purely being naive and not understanding or not having any other model for how to do things.
Okay, thank you for that. We want to delve a little bit deeper into this topic, since each of you all have now shared with us your experiences. Talk to us a little bit about identity fatigue. Now, for those who don't know, that's really a term that's used to describe that feeling of being on guard when you stand out, right? So always sort of walking into a space, and we'll talk about that a little bit, expecting to feel as though you don't belong, or expecting to be excluded from whatever the larger group is doing. So we want to talk to you all a little bit about, I think I'm going to just need to change that. Thanks so much. Okay. So talk to us a little bit about what that experience has been like for you all. Does it show up in some very specific spaces, whether that's socially, whether that's in your family, whether that's at work or at school? And if so, how do you handle it? That would sort of be the first part of it. And more importantly, how does that make you feel? Like, can you feel that switch? Can you feel that tension? Do you feel yourself responding differently after that moment?
Well, I know for me, I said we traveled so much when I was growing up. I was always like the new kid. And so with that, I always try to make sure that I presented myself in a way, because the tide can turn on you really quickly. And so when you are not a part of the majority, it's like, okay, well, Steve is cool, so, we'll hang out with Steve. And so it would normally be where I would go into places, and normally it would end up being, I guess, my own people that would really kind of be the hardest. When I assimilated, when I moved to Kansas, I really didn't have any issues. They were more like kind of the questions of like taking, I guess, media. So, do they sell drugs in your neighborhood, or what was it like, or are there gangbangers where you're from and things of that nature. So those are the things, but I could always kind of curve those, just be like, no, I grew up in a nice, working class African American neighborhood. My neighbor had a construction company. My other neighbor was a nurse, so I could do that. But when I got around my own people, it was like, well, if you weren't, you know, this kind of tough or this kind of hard, like, what was that perception like? And so, you know, it was like in one place I kind of had to be more of a diplomat. The other place I kind of had to be more of a stronger representative. So I guess you could say it was like a form of code switching, if you would.
Well, with identity fatigue and me attending an HBCU, I still experience being the only Hispanic on the room on most occasions, which means I can't always be myself at all times. But the one thing I love about Bowie State is that I may be the only Hispanic in the room, but it does not mean I am the only person of another culture in the room outside the United States. So even though I can't always show my identity or be who I want to be, because most people wouldn't understand, it's okay because they are more accepting of it and they are willing to even be educated on it. And as some of them are from different cultures themselves, so I've learned that it's okay for me to it's okay for me to show myself and not have others understand it, but it doesn't mean that I shouldn't always be myself and who I am.
I'm going to add to what Steve said. I can remember it's harder to get it from your own people. So I went to a predominantly white high school. I was the only black in my class, and so in class, I think the white people would forget that I was black. I'm like, wait a minute, you didn't realize what you just said? I experienced it that way. But now I'm coming up on 50. I don't get the fatigue anymore. I'm really comfortable with who I am and in my skin. I think sometimes, and I tell my daughter this all the time, when I walk into the room, I'm 19 feet tall. I'm 19 feet tall, so always, And I tell her that because you always hold your head up with pride so that people can respect that out of you. So right now, no fatigue, but back in the day, yes, absolutely, I would get the fatigue. And like I said, trying to get darker and not wanting to go by my namesake, so. But currently, I feel really well in my skin.
For me, it's people coming to me. The identity fatigue comes when they meet me and I introduce myself and we start talking. And they'll say, well, were you born here? I said, no, I came to the United States in 1983. Well, you speak English so well. I was like, okay. So that part, it took me a while to say, why do people keep asking me to say, and also to be proud that, my parents, really worked hard to give me, get me through college and get a good education. But, at times, even to present day, when, I meet, professionals in my level and I start talking, you still see sometimes the facial expression, like, oh, I don't hear her accent. But for me, I hear my accent. So that part of the identity is like, why is it that just because people have a heavy accent that they're not smart or they're not, can't think or those type of things. So.
In terms of identity fatigue, I experienced that a lot. Being at a HBCU and knowing that there's a separation of church and state, I feel like a lot of times programs here can tend to be like religiously focused. So being an atheist at an HBCU and having black people assume that because you're black, you're Christian, it's sort of awkward. There was a case where I was in a class and one of my professors, we had like a potluck, just started saying grace. And it's one of those moments like, do I speak up and say that I'm an atheist and I really don't want to sit here and pray? Or do I just, not be that person who's stirring up the pot, so I'll just sit here and be complacent and silent about it. And I mean, that even happens in my own family. Like, because I did grow up in that Christian household, when I told my mom I was an atheist, she was really taken aback. She was like, I don't think so. I think you're Christian. I think you're just lost. I was like, no, I'm not. And the same thing happened with my sexuality as well. It was, no, I think you're just confused. No, I'm not. So it gets really exhausting. Having a family from the Caribbean, I'm always code switching. I don't even know if my family actually knows that I'm atheist. they've given up on trying to figure out what I sexually identify as, which is great. So now I don't have to worry about that. But even in my own personal group of friends, all of my friends are Christian. And when I told them I was atheist, they were fine with that, which was honestly like a relief. But, you know, being here, you know, when people say, you know, glory to God or amen, I'm just like, yeah. And again, it's to really keep the peace, because I actively try not to be that person who people are like, oh my gosh, like she's so sensitive, or why does she have to be so different? Why does she have to talk about it? Just go with the flow. So I do find myself code switching a lot here on campus, and my family, within my groups of friends and stuff like that. And it honestly can be really exhausting.
So we've now used the term a lot, so let's talk about it, right? Code switching. Because in our conversations to prepare for this, we thought about the different ways in which I think we have experienced as African Americans trying to assimilate into different parts of society. And so we have certain terms that we use to go along with that, code switching being one of them. And we were really curious to find out how it may show up in the experiences of other communities. So I would love to hear first from Dr. Lynch, if you would. If you could give us a little bit of background of code switching and perhaps what triggers it. And then if anyone wants to share, you know, if you're willing to admit times and spaces in which you've done it, we would really appreciate it.
Thank you. Losing my voice. I just want to address really quickly just some of the feedback that I heard. That it reminds me that sometimes, again, going back to people's different reactions, that our reactions the fatigue can be something that is manifested outwardly, and it could be something that you kind of deal with internally. You know, the internal fatigue just being in these spaces where you don't feel like you're recognized or that you have to speak up. Sometimes you do feel compelled to react. I know that even in professional spaces, and I will say this, and I tell my students about this, try to prepare them, that as a future HBCU graduate, you are going to be in spaces where the second someone asks you, from where did you get your degree? And you say, Bowie State University, you're going to get that canned response, oh, that's a great school, where they're trying to keep the plastic face, you know, right? Because there's an awareness, it's an HBCU, people have their own experiences with that, and there's a lot of assumptions that come with what an HBCU entails and what kind of your level of preparedness, and that could put us on defense. Or it could be, yes, as a matter of fact, I did, yes, please, you know, note the excellence, right? But it can be, again, it can be internal, but it can also be external, and how people experience that fatigue is interesting. Going back to the code switching, so code switching is when someone may have a normal way of engaging. Think about it when you're with your friends, right? You hang out with your friends, you might be more relaxed, you might use different language, you might feel like you have a different personality, slightly, right? And then around your parents or in a workspace, you might articulate things a little differently, you might have different types of conversation, your body language might be a little different. And it really is just an awareness of the environment, the context in which you're in, and what is the appropriate behavior that's expected in those environments. Culturally speaking, we do that too. W.E. Du Bois referred to it as dual consciousness. That as people of color in particular, but people from, it really does expand into different cultural spaces, that we're aware of what the cultural norms are in different spaces, and we have to, when W.E. Du Bois talked about it, is we have an obligation to be mindful of when we could be in one space and how we can be in another. And that could be exhausting, switching on and switching off, right? And really feeling, as we've heard other people say, not feeling like you could just be your unapologetic self, right? Because you feel like it will not be embraced in those spaces. And that could be, people can embrace that or experience that in different ways. Fatigue, that could be depression, that could be anxiety. And so code switching really is just realizing what aspects of you have to kind of turn on or turn off in different spaces, whether it's to feel comfortable yourself or to make the people around you comfortable. And I could just tell you, making other people feel comfortable, that could be a 24/7 job, and you can never, ever satisfy everyone, right? So that could be that could take a lot of toll on different people.
Okay. So on the same, I thought we were going to talk about code switching.
Yes, actually, sorry, I jumped the gun. Yes, Mr. Stevens.
Okay. No, so I learned how to code switch from my grandmother. So, socialite from a small town called Bainbridge, Georgia, right on the Georgia-Florida line. My grandmother would be fussing at me, and then the phone would ring. And as soon as the phone rang, what I tell? I told you about it. Hello, yes. How are you? And so I was like, why did I voice this shit? I'm 4 years old. I'm trying to figure everything out. And so my senior year, I kind of went on this award circuit where I was winning these like citizenship awards and things. And so when I would give my speeches, I tried to change my drawl, if you will. And when they recorded me and we watched the video, I was like, why do I sound like that? And subconsciously, I didn't even realize that I was changing what I was saying to try to fit the room. And so I think when I got to college, I really made a conscious change to say, I'm just going to speak how I speak. I'm going to be comfortable in my skin and carry myself the way I see fit.
I agree with Mr. Stevens. It wasn't until I got here that I realized that I was doing like on campus, Jose was different than, Jose that's working with administration or working with Greek life or student life. So I've learned to be myself, be true to who I am, but to learn and to know what behaviors are appropriate for that time or what words or language is good to say at that time, because you're like it all falls back. You don't want to have the same attitude and talk the same way with your friends than when you're talking to a professor or administrator or a coordinator of any kind.
If I can add, I remember I have a very strong memory of when I was starting college. There was a 3-day orientation. I started at the University of California at Davis, a very rural college at the time. Anyway, there was a 3-day orientation, and so we would go in cohorts of 100. And I remember there was also like a summer bridge program where the minority students were invited to come, and there was like a 2-week experience. I couldn't go to that, so here I am at the 3-day experience. And I remember being the only one out of my cohort of 100, being the only African American. I had nobody in my dorm room, it was just me, and I just felt all these little isolating experiences. When people would go to the dorms, they weren't checking for me, I would be walking by myself. It wasn't fresh, right? And I remember one morning going to the dining commons by myself, and I was walking, and I remember being aware that there was, you could bring your parents could come. So I remember there was a Caucasian family walking not too far behind me. And this is probably like day 2 or 3, so at this point I'm like, this is just a lot, right? And so I remember a young African-American male, probably a freshman like myself, coming out of the dining commons, and I was like excited. I was like, there's somebody else, right? So internally I'm preparing myself to like greet this person, whoever he is, but I'm also aware that this family's behind me. And so as we get closer, I'm like debating, do I say something, do I not say something? Do I say something, do I not say something? He looked at me, I looked at him, we both looked, and we passed by. And the reason I didn't say anything is I was conscious of the family behind me, and I didn't want them to think that all black people knew each other. And I didn't say anything. Fast forward a couple of years later, I'm talking to somebody and we realize, hey, that was you in the dining commons. I remember that. And we talked about that moment, and both of us had the same exact experience. We wanted desperately to say something to each other. He was having the same isolating experience I was in another cohort, but we were very aware of the stereotype, and we allowed that to censor us in that moment to our own detriment, right? And I remember that shaped me because I never wanted to feel like that again. And I can't say I got it right every single time, but I remember the shame I felt, and I remember how even more isolated. I was like, I had my chance. It was right there. I didn't say anything. But knowing, again, and I realized that I was doing it for somebody else. They probably didn't even care. They probably didn't. I don't even know that they felt that way. But I completely shaped my behavior, my experience, based on what I thought somebody else needed. And I know that that can be a challenge. And what I'm hearing, another theme I'm hearing is, you get a little older, you start to care a little less. So live a little while longer, right? But when you're 18, 17, 21, it's hard to, your experiences are still so very shaped by society and what you think and what's important. And it isn't until you get to either a defining moment where you're so fatigued that you don't care anymore, or you get a little older, you're like, oh, whatever. Navigating that in-between space can be really challenging. But I'll never forget how I felt that day, that mindfulness of the code and when to switch and when not. So sometimes switching is not doesn't turn out well.
I think that's true for me, like code switching to my own family. My mom, my aunts, finding out that, one of my cousins came out, first lesbian in the family, and you get the phone calls. Can you talk to your cousin? Because I think she's confused. Well, maybe it's just a phase. So now, the younger generation are helping to educate an older, really rigid Catholic family to say, look, the world is changing. You should have acceptance, and each person has his own identity. But for the Catholic family, it's like, no, that's against, that's a mortal sin. They're going to be in hell. Like, Mom, it's not, just let them live their life. If they're happy, if they've found the love of their life, that's the most important part. So that's where I do the code switching, because I have to listen to the aunts and the mothers and saying, where it's wrong for them, but for us, it's like, it's just the world we live in. Yeah.
I actively code switch every day. I'm code switching right now. My partner is white, so when I went to meet his mother, I was really nervous because one, I kept thinking about the film Get Out, and two, I kept asking myself, did he tell her that I'm black? Because this would most likely affect her perception of me and what I'm like. So I find myself, like, whenever I'm in that space with him and like his family, I will actively code switch. And I'll still speak my mind about certain things, but I haven't, unleashed my full potential, or I haven't been my fullest self, which I do, I have an internal conflict about that, because I know how I feel about certain things, and I know that I do, at the end of the day, want to be accepted and be a part of his family, but, that is something for me that's really hard. And then I remember voicing that to my mom, and she was like, well, you have to make a choice, because, if their family is really conservative, or they don't approve of interracial dating or marriage, then ultimately you're gonna have to figure out if that's something that you can deal with. So, I just find that code switching for me, it's sort of like an everyday process. It's what I have to do. This also plays into applying for jobs. Sometimes I'll receive a phone call and I immediately go into my business professional mode. And a lot of times people are surprised when I come in for the interview because they weren't expecting someone like me. Even in my personal life, when I go to silent film festivals and things like that, white people are looking at me like, what are you doing here? One, because I'm black, and then two, because I'm young. So it's just something that I find that I have to deal with a lot.
For me, similar experience to Ayana. I'm in college, University of Virginia, and English major, and me and one other black student in the room. So, we're all talking the English language and looking at each other like, who's going to answer the black question, right? That class. And then as soon as class was over, I'm like, whew. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted. I'm like, exactly. We spent the entire class worrying about, how they're going to perceive us, how we need to answer the question, what should we do. So we made a pact. Last day of class, we were like, we're going for it. We're going to be outright and do what we need to do. We waited the entire semester. But they were like, who are these two people talking? But I'm like, man, we were exhausted. It was exhausting, yeah.
May I say something really quickly? This reminds me, so there's research on the impact of people navigating different cultural spaces and the reactions they get from other people. So there's a lot of research on microaggressions. So specifically, we've heard a couple today about when someone speaks and they're like, oh wow, you're so articulate, or I don't hear your accent. Now, on the surface, that sounds really like you can't put your finger on it. It feels a little taste of something, but you can't put your finger on it. But research shows that people's reaction to stress that comes with dealing with microaggressions, a small little stinging expectations or digs, right, you said, whether it's intentional or unintentional, is far more arduous on our bodies and our minds than overt racism or isms, any isms, right? So you think it's when people call you out your name or call you the N-word or call you something, right, that is a reflection of your cultural experience, but it's actually the opposite, the stress that comes with hearing those things and usually stifling, because you can't really address it because it's not so tangible that you're not sure, and probably the stress associated, trying to figure out if it was or it wasn't, and then probably how you react to it, and probably even try to be more accommodating if that's the case. That can be really, really stressful. So to hear, literally coming out and exhaling, that's a reflection of how stressful it can be to be in these spaces where you have these expectations or these encounters with others. You got to be mindful of that.
I can totally agree with that. I think with the microaggressions, it just lingers. It's like, did they mean to say that way, or did I say something that made them insinuate that? But being on both sides of the coin, because I had been called the N-word to my face, it was like a direct impact, like hard blow. But, the next day, it was like, I processed and I kind of moved on. But with those microaggressions, it might be at the dinner table 2 weeks later, like, did she really think that I said something like that? So, yeah, I totally understand.
All right, we are moving quickly based on the time, but I'm gonna start with this question for Dr. Lynch. Having to be twice as good is something we know that is common within the Black community. And as it relates to people feel this pressure to overextend themselves to compete with the social majority. Do you think this is still relevant for other social identities, so beyond the African American experience?
Well, I think many of us can relate to how we were raised. It wasn't really a choice of whether you should be twice as good. It was the social expectation. And I think we want to really emphasize, I'm going to kind of fast forward to my answer to this, the extent to which we feel like we have to do that is really a reflection of society. And I'm thankful that our society is changing, that we can have conversations like this more regularly, that there are organizations that see this as valuable. But society really dictates how we are seen, how open and tolerant and accepting and embracing the society dictates how unapologetically we could be ourselves, right? And so if you're in spaces, and it could be the rest of society is very open, but in the culture that you're in, that could be professionally, that could be academically, that could be socially, personally, those are the places that help us figure out what the level of expectation or competition is, right? And so we are raised, and a lot of what we think and believe is shaped by the people who have influenced us. That's not just our parents, it's our siblings, it's our friends, etc. And so from that perspective, I know that older generations definitely infused in their socialization of their children that there was no other alternative. You had to get an education that wasn't optional, right? And you had to be excellent. And that's the only thing. Excellence was the only thing that was going to overcome people's expectations of you. And it was the only thing that was going to unlock opportunities for you. And because the second you walk in the door with whatever your identity is, there's already some preconceived notion that you are less than. So you didn't have the opportunity not to overcome that with your excellence. So you had this expectation that you had to drive yourself. I wish I could say that wasn't the case now, but I think that there is still a kernel of truth of that. And again, I go back to the importance of recognize that as an HBCU, whether you work here or you're being educated here. Until society completely embraces that HBCUs are excellent institutions of higher learning, and we turn out the best of the best, until that is widely embraced, you are going to have to come up against those expectations, and the only way that you're going to overcome them is with being twice as good. Whether we're still in a society where women are not still receiving equal pay. So there's still an expectation that you have to be better than, not even equal to, better than, exceed those who are around you in order to have the same opportunities. So I wish I could say that's not the case, but it's probably better to err on the side that that's what you're going to have to do until otherwise notified, right?
Thank you for that. We also want to give you all an opportunity to share with us, if you will, and especially in this space, because the one thing we all have in common here is that we are part of the BSU community. So I think it's important to let our community hear from you, not just in terms of the experiences that you have had, but the experience that you are having, as I think Zenobia has talked a lot about. So we want to take that concept of fight or flight and sort of turn it on its head a little bit to talk about it in this context. What do you normally do? Do you fight it with your presence? Do you flee it by trying to sort of assimilate and kind of just fade to the background? And then when do you find yourself taking up the fight or deserving to just sort of fly away from it? Is it with where you live? Is it with where you work? Is it with where you choose to go to school? So just talking to us about how you create safe spaces for yourself, and whether that is through your identity or whether it is in spite of your identity.
That's a lot. I know for me, I think I've just always put that mantle on my back and been like, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to be the best in the room. And, you know, whether I'm in, you know, meetings with, you know, Fortune 500 CEOs or, you know, sitting at a table with, you know, my kids that I coach football at, I'm always pushing to say, look, this is what you have to do, this is where you have to be the best, and I'm always conscious of how I represent myself to say that, you know, 100%, you know, and I think just going to, you know, predominantly black schools from elementary school through college, it was always like, you know, my football coach said, go be average at Notre Dame or Oklahoma. At Langston, you have to be exceptional. My teacher said you have to be twice as good as those that you're going up against when you graduate from college. So every time I walk in a room, I'm carrying all of that and saying, hey, I'm going to run this room, and I'm going to go in, and I don't even think about it as something that is like makes me tired or something that makes me feel like, you know, this is what I want to do. I go in like I'm representing for my people, I'm representing for my family, my culture, and my heritage, and I'm going to nail it every time.
Following, I have no plans of flighting, even though that may be a solution for others. For me, it's like Mr. Stevens says, is to be great.
For me, I always get a laugh because I tell everybody I came here in 1985 and I never left the campus. I've been in the library for my office longer probably than I'm in my house because I moved several times. So for me, you know, that's being proud of what Bowie State University has given me and my family. 6 other family members and my brother-in-law all came and graduated from Bowie State University. And so, you know, it's part of our family life, and we're proud of it. And it's been very welcoming, the culture, the family, you know, the caring for each other. I went to the university in the Philippines, and, you know, I still have some friends, you know, but I didn't see the amount of caring and helping each other because our class sizes were bigger there too. But when I started here for my master's, you know, the professors were very nurturing, and so it's just a place for us to get the quality education and, you know, culture and family that, you know, it's hard to find anywhere else.
I'm going to be completely honest, because I am a student and I do care very much so about my GPA and my grades, I have to put into perspective, if I fight a peer, a teacher, a faculty member, staff member, on something that has to deal with my identity, will that negatively impact me? And that's something that I always have to be conscious of. There have been times where I was in classes and conversations took a harsh turn, and I had to really sit and think, if I say something, what exactly is going to happen if the whole entire class is against my opinion? And of course there have been times where I've spoken up regardless, because honestly I'm getting too old. I don't care anymore. So I just learned that there are certain things I'm not going to tolerate. But there have been other times where I have just, you know, taken the flight path and I've just let certain things slide. But again, it's because of my status as a student. You know, at the end of the day, people who hold power can do things that may be unjust and unfair, and I want to make sure that I'm still in good standing and I'm taking care of myself. Even in the workplace, it's hard, you know, if I have a differing opinion and I voice that, and then my managers are looking at me like, well, she's giving us trouble. Maybe we should cut her hours, or maybe we should fire her. Things like that, which is something that did happen to me at a past job because I didn't tolerate one of my managers discriminating against me. So it's something that I do have to be conscious of, and it honestly really depends like what's going on in that moment for me to make those decisions here on campus, with my family, friends, and in my personal life.
I would say externally, I'm a fighter. I'm going to always fight and make sure everything that I do is something that I know that it has integrity and ethics. The one thing I get zinged on is that, oh my gosh, you're always consistent. And I'm like, I am consistent. You speak to everybody. I do speak to everybody. I mean, Steve, you had to speak to everybody or you would have gotten in trouble when you were growing up. But for me, the fight is more for the students. I know that I'm at this university for the students, and that's I'm coming to work for the students, period. I'm not here for any other reason, you know, because the school will definitely shut down if you leave. But the flight, every now and then, my positive energy gets drained, so I just go home and fly away. Take a little bath, you know, get my energy back up. So I don't do it probably externally, it's more so than I do internally.
If I may, I think, again, loving all the responses, I think it also shows that you don't have, if you identify as a fighter, you don't have to be you don't have to fight and have your dukes up every single time, right? You have the freedom to decide when you want to fight and when you want to flee. So that's completely fine. Like, don't feel, you know, that's part of I feel like the ownership we take of being in these spaces and experiences. The other thing is, so again, pick your battle. Sometimes the battles determine, and what's important to you is going to determine when you fight and when you don't. I just wanted to respond very quickly. The faculty member in me is like, I feel a little saddened to hear that there's students who feel like even on this campus that you cannot be yourself or speak your voice. And if we can't do that in spaces of higher learning, I don't know how you feel any more equipped to do it in spaces outside of here. And so what I hope that people are hearing is that we need to do better as a faculty, as a university, to make sure that all of our spaces feel inclusive and that they're safe and that I'm speaking for all faculty, and if it's a issue and it comes up, I'm telling you, you are empowered. No one, not an employer, not a faculty member, should ever hold anything against you because your voice is different or your opinion is different. If you can't express divergent opinions in the classroom, that's a problem. And if that's not being invited or if it is being stifled, if your voice is being stifled, that's a problem that you as students absolutely should feel empowered. Maybe you feel like, and I understand, obviously we were students once upon a time, right? And I understand that you want to protect your grade, but you should never feel like your grade or your achievement or your standing in school is ever jeopardized by you voicing your opinion. And this is the place that's supposed to be an area of growth and experimentation. This is your playground so that you are prepared to do whatever it is that you have set in your path ahead of you. And that if you feel like, and again, about choosing your battles, I'm not saying fight every professor, but you find other ways to fight too. I always tell my students, be armed with intelligence. You fight an intelligent fight. So you may not clap back. Please don't clap back in class. That's not my advice. Don't say that Dr. Lynch told you when you feel, in some kind of way in the class to clap. That's not what I'm saying. There's ways to intelligently clap back. So maybe you have a conversation with the professor later on and tell how you felt in that space. Or you send an email, or you speak to an advisor and figure out how to navigate that. And there should never be a time that you feel like your education, your grade, your standing is ever jeopardized by you having a different opinion, especially in a place where diversity and inclusion is supposed to be valued. So I hope you leave here, I hope all of you leave here feeling a little bit more empowered. Please be yourself. Again, if you so choose, but if you decide you want to fight a different way or not fight at all, that is your right, but don't ever feel like you don't have the right to speak up.
Let me just interject there, because one way that you can fight, and I know that we've had this conversation, but I haven't had an opportunity to have it with everyone, is by coming to the Office of Equity Compliance. It's in your best interest at all times to use all of the resources that are available to you here on this campus, and our office is one. I never want a student or a faculty or staff member to feel like in times of adversity, specifically when we're talking about these things, that you're by yourself and having those conversations. And sometimes it really does come down to having conversations. We recognize that not everyone that we work with here in this community is as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about some of the ideas and some of the things that we've been discussing today, but that's why we're doing this work. Sometimes that work has to become a little more specific, and we're okay with that. But you don't have to do that on your own behalf. You can come and let us work with you or work on your behalf. And that's just a reminder for everyone. Listen, our time is drawing to a close, unfortunately. So I did want to give you all an opportunity to answer one more question. And if there's anyone here in the audience who has anything that they'd like to share, please, by all means, we welcome it as a part of this discourse. But I did want to hear from you all. What's the one thing, given what you shared today, that you would like the BSU community to know, to be mindful of, or to think about when they are dealing with people, as we are every day, who have identities that may be different than their own?
Okay. To come in with an open mind, approach everything in a way that says it the same way that you don't want anybody to judge or assume things about you. It's the same way with the same positive energy that you give back. I tell people all the time when they ask me about, working here, I say it's a lot of positive people at my job. I say the hardest thing about my job is the commute in and the commute home, because when I get to work, I don't work at all. I really love what I do, and I have a great environment that was provided to me by staff and my supervisor and people like that. So as long as you give positivity, you'll definitely get it back in one way or another.
The one thing I want, not only myself, but the Bowie State community to learn about this discussion is to be more mindful of a person's race, religion, color, creed, sexual orientation, all that, because you never know what someone might be going through or what they feel or their opinion. So for you to discriminate them because of that is a problem, and if you do, then you should look at yourself as part of the problem as well.
Yeah. I think this is helping all of us see how, I think that perspective taking is so important, and you have to put yourself in positions and be more mindful and intentional about putting yourself in different spaces and places, or even in your space, to be aware of who else is in the room and what their experience could be like. I know that I often challenge my students. I always tell them, I'm comfortable with your discomfort, and you have to be willing to put yourself in some uncomfortable positions to figure out what somebody else's experience is, but it's also how you grow. That's where you stretch. And I encourage students to do that as often as possible. I encourage faculty and staff to elicit those type of opportunities, or to be more mindful and intentional about bringing in other perspectives and inviting people to share and grow in those ways.
For me, that same thing, being mindful, and also sort of opening your mind, because sometimes, our students or even the people we work with have, behaved that way because of what their family life is. And just because, they speak a certain way, it doesn't mean that, they're bad. It's just that maybe they haven't experienced, a mentor who would tell them, look, maybe you can change for the better if you do this. And, so because it took something like that for me in high school to realize, hey, you can do better in class instead of just, floating around. So sometimes when students also challenge us, especially in the open labs downstairs, or, we're in the hallway in the library, I became aware, when I first started here, to realize that, we're coming from different walks of life, and their experiences are not mine. So just make it positive somehow.
In the vein of keeping an open mind, I feel like one thing this school and a lot of HBCUs specifically need to stray away from is the idea of essentialism, or claiming that a certain group of people are only a certain group of people because of these attributes. When you assume things about people, it can cause a lot of conflicts because you're sort of imposing your own judgments and your own views on what you expect other people to be. So I feel like if our campus could be more inclusive, open-minded, and accepting to different types of people, we would be working and moving in a better direction. Because honestly, this campus is still sort of, in my opinion, stagnant. We have a lot of work to do, and I feel like when we start actually getting comfortable with different types of people, then we can start being more progressive.
For me, I would say to listen. Have you ever wondered why some people have all the students around them, or why you have like 900 advisees and then your colleague only has 2? It's probably because you've taken time to really listen to what the person is saying. Body language, I mean, a student will open up to you if you listen to them. And I would just say listen to each other, listen to the students, listen to everybody. I can remember real quick for Christmas, I was giving out Christmas cards, you know, to everybody. And this one lady, she started crying, the ABM lady. You know, she just started crying. She was like, no one has ever given me a Christmas card here at Bowie State. And I'm like, oh, I'm giving it to you because you are very helpful. I mean, and then she just started talking to me, and I listened to her. And so I just think it's very important that you listen to what people are saying to you. The verbal clues, everything. Okay.
All right, now we would like to open up the floor to see if anyone in the audience would like to be engaged and, you know, inquire something from our panelists. I see. There's a wireless mic.
Hello.
That's 1, 2. Okay, if you can.
Hello. I am a student here. I'm a senior. I am a first-generation college student. My parents had me very, very young, so they didn't get the opportunity to go to college. I'm also Afro-Latino. My family's from Panama. But it kind of sucks because my Spanish sucks. My grandma and her 6 other siblings, they came to Southeast in like 1977, and they were teased for being black and speaking Spanish. So they never taught it to my mom and their children. So I felt a little, I don't want to say slighted, but once I got older, I was like, damn, I don't know no Spanish. So like, come on, like everybody like 30 and up in my family speaks Spanish, but nobody within my age group speaks Spanish because they didn't teach it to us. And they didn't teach it to us because they were teased and bullied for it. So when you all, Jose, and what's your name? Mm-hmm. Zenobia, I really related to you two so much because I grew up in a Caribbean Christian strict family, and I also grew up in an Afro-Latino household. So it was sometimes a little hard being able to relate to Black American children and even Latino children. Oh, what do you mean you're Latino? You're black. Girl, bad. Like, we everywhere, okay? So I just wanted to say, you two, especially being a student here, I related to you all a lot, and I appreciate you guys for being so brave. So I just wanted to say that. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, graduating senior. Thank you.
Hello, how's everybody doing?
Good.
I'm author Taja Norman. I'm a junior here at Bowie State University, and I'm a communications major. And I just wanted to touch on an experience that I had where I felt left out, where
I can speak loud enough. I've heard a lot of people say that you should listen to, be open to what people are saying, but I think also that the people that are the only one in the room should be open to having someone ask you valid questions, because a lot of times people are not conscious of how they're making you feel. So if someone is asking you a question about you being from El Salvador, all the time it's not to offend you. It's just because I don't know. So if I never knew that you were from El Salvador, so hearing you say that today, it's eye-opening. So I'll have questions for you, but we should be comfortable enough when someone comes to you with questions about your differences and not be offended by the person that's asking, because truly you might not know and you just want to get clarity on what to.
No, I agree with that, and I always appreciate when someone comes in with me with questions instead of assumptions, because to say that I celebrate a certain holiday like Cinco de Mayo, for example, it's like, no, we don't celebrate that. But to ask me, hey, does your family celebrate Cinco de Mayo, or do you celebrate Mexican Independence Day? And then I'm like, okay, so this person really is interested in my culture and are many cultures in the Latino, Hispanic community. So yes, I always am appreciative when someone comes to me with questions instead of assumptions, and I thank you for that so much.
I think over time I learned how to take the questions and assumptions. Talking with my mother a lot, she was like, well, people just don't understand. And if you've never been around an African American male before and you've seen boys in the hood of men's society, then maybe you assume that every neighborhood is just like that. So over time I learned that it was a teachable moment. Now, if you ask me those same questions over and over again, then maybe I'll become offended and like, okay, we've already been through this. But the first time I was like, okay, this is a teachable moment, and that's how we'll carry it. So,
I have a question, and hopefully I'm loud enough for everybody. So I think right now we're in a really wonderful phase at the university where we're just listening, we're really taking in a lot of what our students are saying. I think I have heard recently students feel more listened to than ever, which is great in BSU's history. With that being said, I don't want our students to feel that all we're doing is listening. So what can we show our students? What actions can we take to say, okay, we don't just tolerate you, we're accepting and celebrating your identity that you may feel or not feel marginalized on our campus. So in the next couple of years, what action do you all hope to see as faculty, staff, students on our campus about that?
Just keep listening and see what the students have to say, what actions they suggest, and see what collaborations you guys can do or the school could do. Oh, okay. So on April 21st, there will be a Hispanic Latino ceremony awards to recognize all the Hispanic and Latino, and we might add the multicultural aspect of it to identify all the excelling students, workers, staff, and just give them a little bit of recognition for the semester and for the school year, because I know it's the 2 semesters in a year, it's very tough, and it's a training, and it can be a lot, so we just wanted to do something to recognize those individuals who have made Bowie State so far what it is.
And for me too, aside from listening, I think it's the education, the training that we need. I have learned a lot this year from the different training sessions, so that, when somebody came to me to say that, look, I'm getting tired of this person sending me Christian email, and she's also an atheist. And so, however, when I gave her, inform HR or, asked for advice, unfortunately, it wasn't handled, quite sensitively, because they just contacted the person and say, stop sending her email. So she became challenged and uncomfortable, because now the other person knows that she was, she didn't like being sent those emails, which brought up negative feelings. But I think, so I told her, just don't make it a negative. Make it like an educational moment. Maybe HR now knows not to handle it that way. So it's on the way to learning new things and opening our world up. So I'm really very thankful.
From a faculty perspective, I definitely think I'm so excited that we have this new office, and I echo everything that's been said. It's been an abundance and definitely a visible presence of lots of different cultures being celebrated. I think we're moving in the right direction. I know that there's a lot of faculty who are infusing more cultural topics in their courses, so that's, I challenge faculty and departments to think about different ways that they can include that. if it's really the expectation or the value of the institution, that could be something that is required, perhaps I used to be the chair of the General Education Committee, and so if that's something we feel like is important, then we need to have a wide range of classes that students can choose from and experiences, not just one, but several throughout their matriculation. Or we need to require that there's some elements, that students attend a certain number of programs or engage in different ways or activities throughout their matriculation. So, because you can't do it in one conversation, you can't do it in one class. And I think faculty, again, I want to echo that providing every space to be as welcoming to ideas, if that's just the practice here, then it's not about being, I love that you pointed out that it's not about being tolerant, like, yeah, you can come and be here. It has to be really an engagement and an opportunity for there to be exchange of ideas. And it's not just with respect to race and ethnicity and gender and sexuality. It's recognizing that we have, even the terms that we use, non-traditional students, we have older students or people who are coming returning from other careers. It's people from different areas of the country or other countries. There's so many different ways. First generation students, all those different spheres that we navigate, and just making it welcoming and an opportunity for people to share those ideas. So as often as possible, providing a platform for people to share, either intentionally with requirements or assignments or classes, or just making your space safe.
Just to add to that, I was just hearing the other day that there's a bill going through the District of Columbia right now where they are considering making African American history a mandatory part of their high school curriculum, where everyone would have to take it. So, I think that we all know, to your point, Rob, the ways in which we can actually help the issues that are being brought to our attention. And so I would say that what I would like to see more of, and I think you know that I'm a big fan of this, not everyone is, but more work actually being done on the issues that we're faced with. I mean, to have a meeting and to have a conversation with someone about something that you see as being missing from a program or department. Make a recommendation, offer support to see that recommendation go through, but also hold them accountable with some dates and times whereby you can meet again and see something come of that. It's really a lost art. We love to meet, we love to discuss, we love to listen, we love to hear, but we are often reticent to actually do work ourselves, expect work from other people, and so nothing gets done. So case in point, the meeting we had a couple of weeks ago, I was very clear about what we learned from students. You were very clear about what you could do in order to help, and now we're collaborating and we're working towards a specific end that students will be able to see. I don't know of any other way to get it done. Great intentions are really important, and I think part of this conversation is about giving people an opportunity to know the ways in which we are still missing the target just a little bit. And hopefully we'll have more conversations. Well, I know we'll have more conversations like this because that's all a part of the work that we're doing. But what I would love to see is conversations start in other areas after this conversation, where people start talking to each other about how they can actually work together to make some difference based on what it is they've learned here is going on with our community. Yes?
Hi. I just want to perhaps end on this note to Zenobia and everyone. It really struck me when you mentioned the religious, the cringing, and I just want you to know that I heard you. I'm sorry, Karen Shakir, General Counsel and Chief Staff to the President. This is an issue that I've been here for 13 years that we have been struggling with and trying to work through. And I hope you have seen some sort of glimpses of progress. You probably know in some of our convocations and commencement that we've eliminated, we're trying to go to a moment of centering. We are trying to be sensitive and inclusive. But we have work to do. I mean, I cringe when I get the emails with the scriptures below them. And look, I'm a Christian married to a Muslim, raised by a Muslim. So I mean, I totally get it. So Adana and I have been working. We have a program coming up now where I think a lot of people who've been here a long time are so accustomed to it. And so we're trying to gently sort of educate them and pull them away from what they're accustomed to. It's like it really is not acceptable at a public institution to, we have a gospel choir, and I was just saying I heard Morgan State's gospel choir at a service yesterday, and I could listen to them all day. But we have to strike that balance, and we have to be inclusive. It's just from a legal perspective, we don't have a choice as far as I'm concerned. But aside from the law, this is an inclusive community, and not everyone is Christian, and not everyone, is religious at all. And so, yes, people have a right to express themselves, but, as far as I'm concerned, your computer doesn't belong to you. It's Bowie State's computer, so you really don't have a right to put scripture on your email signature. But we'll cross that bridge at another time. For now, I hope you at least see, Dr. Bro's very much aware of this, and we've been gently over the years trying to strike a balance, at least in our public, what we call mandatory convocation. So if we're requiring you to come to a convocation, then we shouldn't subject you to that sort of thing. I mean, what you do in your clubs, your organizations, or just hanging out on campus, I think there are some religious clubs, that is totally acceptable. But for required things that we say as an institution we want you to do to get an education, we can't force you. I just wanted you to know that I heard you, and Dr. Bro hears you, and we know we got work to do on that one. So.
And I think I hear you saying perhaps we've been a little too gentle, and that's fine.
Take it up a notch.
I'm prepared to take it up a notch. This is my direct supervisor, and she knows. Kicking it up a notch is one of my specialties. So.
With that said, I'm going to have to unfortunately end this lovely conversation so that we can get on to our reception where we can continue this dialogue, but our time here now is over. So on behalf of the Office of Equity Compliance,
the Office of Multicultural Programs and Services,
we just want to say thank you all so much for coming out, for participating. Please continue this dialogue, not just with us in Ballroom C, right after this, where we'll be having our reception, but again, amongst yourselves. And when all else fails, actually before that, please reach out to the Office of Equity Compliance and the Office of Multicultural Programs and Services if you have any ideas about ways in which we can interact with our community so that we can continue to push ourselves forward. Please do not forget to sign in. If you have attended this, please make sure that you sign in either with our sign-up sheet or using the QR code.
QR code and or the old school sign-in sheet, which is circulating somewhere out there.
Because in order to continue these programs, we need to make sure that we let everyone know just how interested you all are in this kind of education and interactive opportunity. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.